Hello and welcome everybody to episode 5 of the Racer's Edge Live. Doesn't time fly? Even in a lockdown, I guess. Anyway, usual beginning, and I would never go without this. Big thank you to all those in the front line at the moment in this really difficult time. As ever, lots of talk on, particularly on the internet, I guess, about where motorsport is right now, where it's going, when it's going to restart. Lots of people weighing in with their opinions. Should there be plans to try to get anything going in 2020 or not? And so, the reaction, my reaction to that is no different, really. I think, obviously, we have to wait, but I do think that this is an opportunity to take stock. And it would be great if, when we did restart motorsport, we did in a different way. I think there should be a lot of rethinking, particularly in Formula One. And that's about the money, about the people, the way we do it, the way we travel, the amount we spend, how we go about our racing. I've said a lot about that already in these shows, and happy to talk about it a lot more as well as we go on. Don't forget now, we are live. You can throw some questions at me, make some points on the live chat to the right of the YouTube channel there. I've got my mobile phone here, and I'll be looking at those. Equally, at some point in the show, I am going to go away from that because we're going to make a live call to a friend of mine, which I think you'll very much enjoy. Lots of very nice comments from everybody as well. Thank you for those, saying how much you're enjoying it. I'm certainly having a lot of fun doing this, particularly going through all those APArchives or the APArchive.com and having a look at what's available out there and how much footage there is of everything. We've got a few more surprises in store, hopefully, this week for you as well. Let me begin by saying that although we lost Sir Stirling and we're still missing him so much, it's still a bit of a shock, really, to know that he's gone. But 2 days after he passed away, we also lost his first wife, Katie Molson, as she was when Stirling married her in 1957, one of the Molson brewery family from Canada. It was a quick romance, and Stirling married her in 57, and they built an amazing house together, actually, in Nassau, which Stirling finished just prior to or during the Nassau Speed Weeks of that period. I mentioned last week that one of my favorite books was behind the scenes of, I said it was international motor racing. In fact, it's called Behind the Scenes of Motor Racing, Ken Gregory. Ken was very much Stirling's manager, but also helped a lot of other drivers, particularly Peter Collins, and he was instrumental in the formation of BRP, British Racing Partnership, the team which Stirling's father played a role in as well. But just going back to 1957, his chapter on 1957 is called 1957, Wonderful Year. And he says, after Caracas, where Stirling was racing a sports car, Stirling went to Nassau there to meet Katie, who had flown out from England. They hoped to be able to move into their new house on Camperdown Heights, but building was slower than anticipated, and this was not possible. So they knuckled down and joined in the work. Stirling, guess what? Digging holes, tiling roofs, making cupboards, erecting a bar, and all sorts of other things. And I suspect thoroughly enjoying himself, and I suspect he would have been as well, because that's exactly how he spent many of his post-career years, doing all that sort of stuff. The Stirling that I first met when I came over from Australia in the early 70s had a Vespa scooter. He would ride around London thinking that anybody that didn't ride a scooter was a twat. I think he called them something like that. And well, let's call them a twit. And he would be going from low discount do-it-yourself store to another one, buying bits here, buying bits there. He had a string of properties that he let out. He was the landlord of all these properties, but he would not allow anybody to manage them. He had to do everything himself, whether it was fixing a leaking pipe, whether it was electrical problem down here on the other side of London, he would go and do it himself. And I remember him saying, it's the only way, old boy, when you're not racing, you have lots of apartments, lots of flats, lots of property, London property, and but don't employ anybody, don't spend any money on anything, just do it all yourself, That was a big lesson for me. It was in the mid-70s, actually. I remember Stirling, we all know that his house, I hope you all do, that his house in Mayfair was full of every gadget you could possibly imagine. He had a shaft coming up from the kitchen to the bedroom so that the food would arrive at the front of the bed. He could turn on the bath from the bed. He could control the temperature of the water, all these things, just brilliant. And I remember when video recorders came along, he got one of the first big Philips video recorders, and he was showing it to me. It must have been about 74, I guess, 75. And he was showing it to me how, not proud, he was just completely staggered at how good it was, and that finally he could record things and didn't have to sit around waiting for them to come on and watch them. And I was very impressed, as you would be. And the first time I actually made any money at all, I was very lucky to win a competition. And I won enough money, it was 750 quid actually, it's quite a lot of time and money at the time, to buy one of these massive Philips video recorders. And so I bought one, and my TV at the time was only a tiny little black and white TV, tiny one. So I had a 750 quid video recorder with it. So I remember saying to Stirling, before I connected, I said, Stirling, I forgot to ask, does the video recorder work on a black and white television as well as it works on your color TV, do you think? And he said, only a prat would have a black and white TV. I've never forgotten that. Yeah, I was a prat then, of course. Anyway, that was classic Stirl. And let's just have a quick look, actually, at Katie, just to remember Katie Moss and those times. And I got to say, before we just run this little piece, Susie, who has just been wonderful over the last, I don't know how long, of Stirling's life, but looking after Stirling right to the end. She's been an amazing partner for Stirling. But towards, in the autumn of their lives, Katie and Susie's still with us, obviously. That Susie and Stirling went to Nassau, as they did on several occasions, where David McLaughlin, a very good friend of mine, was running and staging the revival, the Speed Week revival in the Bahamas. So Stirling and Susie went over there, and Katie had remained there and was living there at the time, and David reintroduced them. And they became very good friends, and so it was it was a wonderful thing, actually, and a lot of what should I say, dignity, I think, from Susie, that she was such good friends with Katie Moss as well. So this little snippet here just shows some pictures of Katie with Susie, but let's roll that now, and it starts with the marriage of Katie and Stirling in '57 in Mayfair in London. Peter Collins was there, Mike Hawthorne. It was an amazing event. Look at the cars around the cake. I've got one of those D-types, actually. Brilliant. There's Katie. It was a big deal at the time. And there they are in the Bahamas in later years. Stirling, obviously, and there's Susie on the left in the black, and there's Katie Molson, who passed away. And there's the house they built in Camperdown Heights. And there's Stirling on the left. Looks like he's with Pat there, his sister, I would say. I don't think that's Katie, the other girl. They're just putting a boat down. There's NSU Prince in the background. And that is a picture that David McLaughlin sent at that time. Stirling signing the steering wheel of a young Carter who was out there, called Ollie Caldwell, who's racing today, really quick young English driver. So yeah, what an amazing thing. I bet he's really looking after that steering wheel, that signed steering wheel. So big thanks to Anna Wassitsch for those photographs who took them. First time they've ever been published, and wonderful to see there to see how they got on so well. And Katie was, apparently she was just brilliant. I never got to know her, I never even met her, but she was one of the real stalwarts of Nassau. And equally, she went back to Canada in the last few years of her life. But she passed away 2 days after Stirling. They say, friends who knew her, of a broken heart. Anyway, there we go. So let's have a look at some of your questions. We've got some other videos coming up. Mr. Dieselakias says, I think we covered this last week, but he says, Peter, I expected you to have published several books, but apparently you haven't. Well, you're absolutely right. I remember when Nicky first won the World Championship, which was '75, I remember a publisher rang and said, oh, Nicky would like to do we'd like to do a biography of Nicky, and we'd love you to write it. And I ummed and ahed, and at the time I was writing for Autocar, working for Autocar magazine, doing a weekly, full time, but I had a weekly column. I was doing all the Grand Prix, and I was doing lots of other stuff as well. I just started to help Frank Williams a bit with some bits and bobs with the team. And so I said, no, I'm too busy. And then nobody's ever asked since then. So there you go. Now, there have been a few opportunities. I've written sections of books. I've written a section of a book on Gilles Villeneuve and on Jimmy. And I helped write a book actually about circuits of the world, which I've never seen. I saw it once, and then I don't think you can buy it anymore, but I wrote most of those. It was various drivers talking about laps of specific circuits. And that was a lot of fun doing. But I've never done a book because I'm kind of scared to do it, if I'm really honest. One of my best buddies is Nigel Roebuck, who I think is one of the best writers I know or I've read. And not only in motor racing in general. And Nigel hasn't done a book for, I think, at least 20 years now. And he says it's because the amount of effort and time you have to put in relative to the amount of money you can really make from a motor racing book these days is not worth it. And that's kind of sad, isn't it? That there are obviously the people out there that love the books, but it's not enough given the cost of publishing to actually do the books anymore. I'm not driven by that. In my decision, really. It's just that I'm so busy all the time doing stuff, doing this sort of thing, and lots of other stuff to sit down and write a book. It's something I keep saying to myself, I will do it at one point, and I'll sit on a balcony, I guess, somewhere and start writing, and hopefully it'll just keep going and something will happen. But I don't know, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I guess that's the real problem. So I don't know. I'll tell you one thing that I nearly did, excuse me, just stop for a coffee. Jack Oliver, who raced for Lotus, BRM and Gulf 917s, quick driver, really quick driver, good bloke. He and I used to be very good friends, actually. We used to hang out quite a lot in coffee shops of the world at various Formula One races. And Oliver, Jackie, once said to me, Peter, if you're ever interested in doing a book, let me know. And I thought, well, it's the usual thing. So we started to chat. And he said, no, I don't want to do a racing book. He said, I've got lots of ideas in my head, storylines. And what we should do is a novel. I want to do a novel, and I want you to write it, and I'll give you the storyline. And I thought that was quite interesting, and I kept pushing him for a bit, and then it kind of faded away. In a way, I wish that had happened. I quite like the idea of doing a novel. I know that it would be pathetic, though, because I think my storylines would just not work. I just don't have that ability to create a character and give it a name and then feel comfortable with that name and character as a real thing and write about it. To me, it will always be a false image, so therefore it doesn't go very far. That kind of explains it anyway. So far as writing goes, though, I do love writing. I don't think I'm any good at it, but I love trying to get better all the time. And there's a book that I was recommended by Mel Nichols when he was at Car magazine, I think, called Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, which has been my sort of Bible on writing. And it's something that I still kind of reread periodically. So if anybody's interested in writing, that is the book I would recommend. Toast and Jam, TNJ. Hello, Peter. Tuning in from Cleveland, Ohio. Hi there. Wish you would give us a bit of insight and touch on your involvement with USF1. Well, that's the last thing we'll talk about before I get on to the next video. USF1, I kind of touched on it last week, didn't I? It was not something I undertook lightly. I'd already had 2 attempts to do a Formula One team. One was Brabham, and then the second was Ikuzawa. And both of them would have been very good operations had not some outside factor like somebody we didn't know coming in saying he owned the team, or the Italian stock market collapsing. The Japanese stock market collapsing. So they were, good things. But then USF1 was basically the brainchild of Ken Anderson, who is a really, really clever guy. Speak to Roger Penske, speak to Rick Mears, speak to Patrick Head. Very, very good people will say how good Kenny Anderson is, particularly with damping technology, dampers, shock absorbers. Really, really cool guy, but very imaginative as well and very knowledgeable. You can talk to him about the NASA space program. You can talk to him about the history of the sport. You can talk to him about vehicle dynamics. and he will just talk for hours. Really, really bright guy. And I got to know him when he was coming often to the Williams factory when we were working with Penske on dampers for FW10, FW11, FW12. And Kenny used to come a lot, and we started to chat. American guy. And then he left. He did the Onyx Formula One team. He's very much behind that. And you'll recall Stefan Johansson finishing third in the Onyx at the Portuguese Grand Prix. It was a very, very good team considering the budget they were running. A lot of that was Kenny. And then he went to America. I mean, in America, he won a lot of Indy 500s. Johnny Rutherford raves about it. And he rang me one day and said, look, you know, I've been looking at this whole business of Formula One. David Richards has got an entry for next year. He's in theory going to run McLarens. He's going to be buying McLarens. And when that didn't happen, there were 2 places on the grid. Actually, there were 4 places on the grid that were not being filled by anybody. Everyone was very scared to do Formula One. It was so ridiculously expensive, a bit like today, very much like today. And he said, look, you know, rather be scared of it, let's look at it another way, which is that if there's now an amazing technology corridor running in the States from, say, Charlotte down to Daytona, which is basically born of the NASCAR boom, and there are great companies there, Carbon, machine shops, all sorts of things, including, of course, the full-scale wind tunnel in Charlotte, which Gene Haas commissioned Kenny to design. And he said, you know, we could just do a car very efficiently with American aerospace technology, relatively cheaply. Of course, we'd have to run it out of Europe. Of course, the overheads would be the same in terms of logistics, but we could get a badge on the front of the car that says made in America. And if we've got that, then basically we've got the whole of the United States as our backdrop, and we could do a team around that. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. And I don't think he was wrong about the technology, and I don't think he was wrong about getting hold of American, the American mass and making it happen in motorsport and bringing in young American drivers as well. I think all of that was great. And so I got involved because I just thought it was interesting, different, and had a very good chance of success. Of course, like everybody else, I drew a list of all the things that could potentially go wrong before I crossed the river to do it. And they included things like, would we raise enough money? Would the drivers be any good? Would the cars be any good? Would we get the sponsors we needed? Would we get the support from other teams? How would we do it? All the things that you would normally think about. And of course, there were a few of them which were question marks, but quite a lot of them were ticks. And I spoke to Max Mosley, who was president of the FIA at that time, and obviously to Bernie. They both thought it was brilliant. They would do all they could to help. What I never anticipated was that because we'd got, I think, a very, very good idea and a very good package, and because it had a very good chance of success, there were quite a lot of people that immediately thought, oh, well, if those guys can do it, we can do it over here in England. You know, why should they be allowed to do that? And I don't know how or when, but the Nick Worths and the Mike Gascoignes basically got involved and persuaded Max to do a new budget championship, if you like, within the Formula One championship, modeled on the sort of numbers we were talking about, and to create that as a new championship. And Bernie and Max did that because at the time there was a lot of discomfort amongst existing teams on the way Formula One was being run, the monies involved, particularly Ferrari, McLaren, were talking of doing a breakaway group. And so this was one of the new weapons that was suddenly created, this budget cap Formula One. And it started to go wrong for us when we got a lot of good support early on in 2009. And we were told that we would be signing into the Concord Agreement very quickly and we could be racing in 2010. And of course, part of the plan that we had was to do our own factory, our own operation in America and really make it say made in America. And we were then delayed. We couldn't sign into the Concord Agreement because all of a sudden they decided to do this budget cap Formula One. And we didn't get signed into the Concord Agreement until September-ish. Yeah, August, I think it was. But that by then it was already probably too late to do a car for, well, it was too late to do a car for 2010 in America, basing it around a brand new factory. We couldn't do anything until we'd signed the Concord Agreement in terms of spending anybody else's money. And so we asked for a deferment to start in 2011, and we were told no, because they'd put this out to tender. There were 4 teams they were going to allow in, and if we didn't take ours immediately, there were 3 other teams that would take our place straight away. We were going to run either Toyota or Ferrari engines, but we couldn't do that. We had to buy Cosworth engines. You know, a lot of things just suddenly happened that I never, ever predicted when I did my list of things that could go wrong. And to this day, I think maybe I was stupid, but would anybody have thought about that? Would anybody have really thought in the beginning of 2009 that come July, the FIA were going to announce a budget cap Formula One championship within the Formula One division? I'll never forget, I'll finish here, but I'll never forget the phone call. 2 phone calls I got from Bernie in that period. The first one was to say, Bernie here, I was in America. I know you're talking to Toyota about doing engines, because Toyota loved the idea of an American Formula One team. But listen to this. And then at that moment, live, he brought into the phone call Luca Montezemolo of Ferrari. And Luca said, "Hi, Peter, how are you? Look, we would like to give you Ferrari engines for this American project. We love the whole idea." And Bernie said, "Okay, I'm out of the call now, but I just wanted to do that introduction." So we were, Ferrari engines, brilliant. Then about 2 months later, got a phone call from Bernie saying, "Peter, Ferrari deal's off. You're going to run Cosworth engines, and it's going to cost X, and we need the deposit by next week." It was that sort of thing. And, that's where, of course, we tried as hard as we could to get it onto the grid, but we were not given a deferment. We were not, like Gene Haas, I think, had at least 2 years to get his team ready before he actually raced. We couldn't do that. We had to get it ready. We had to get the car crash tested. We had to build a factory, get all the machine tools in about 4 months. It was a really, really big ask. Anyway, that was SF1. I suppose there's a book there somewhere, isn't there? So let me now, it's now about 20 past 6. The reason I'm saying that is because today, I'm going to get out of my YouTube thing now. Today, the 23rd of April, is the 90th birthday of a gentleman in Scotland called Ian Scott Watson. He is the man, there you see him in the middle in the Deerstalker. The BRDC jacketed gent is Cedric Seltzer, who was Jimmy Clark's #1 mechanic in 1963. And then on the other side in the Zip Boss jacket is Bob Dance, who's a Lotus mechanic then and still today and doing really well. Bob is just absolutely brilliant. But in the middle there, Ian Scott Watson in the Deerstalker. And Ian was the Border Reivers farmer that Jim Clark befriended in the mid-1950s. And it was Ian's cars that allowed Jimmy to show his talent. And it was Ian's money and support, when he saw how good Jimmy was, that allowed Jimmy to start racing at professional level and to be introduced to Jim Clark and to become a factory Lotus driver. In other words, and I think he's been very underrated by the motor racing community in general, without Ian, we would probably never have seen Jim Clark in Formula One. Ian spent a lot of his own money on that because he believed in Jimmy and really wanted him to succeed. And he's a wonderful chap. He's an architect by profession. He was nearly involved in designing a house for Colin Chapman in Ibiza. It never really happened, but he went over there a few times to meet Colin and Hazel to talk about it. But he's designed some beautiful houses, a lot of them wood frame houses. I'd love to have one, all over the UK. And he's still up in a town called Greenlaw, tiny little town in Greenlaw, near Duns in Scotland, where Jimmy was, Churnside. And he lives in a house he designed himself on a farm or near a farm. And he's there now. And I thought it was quite fun. He's obviously there now because he's in self-isolation, to give him a ring. And just live to wish him happy birthday. So here we go. It's ringing now. I was going to put this on speaker. I hope this is going to work in terms of all the technology, because it's probably better than trying to get him on.
Hello, it's Ian Scott Watson.
Hello, Ian. It's Peter Windsor here.
Hello, Peter. I've been thinking for a long time.
Well, I've got to tell you, Ian, we're actually on my live show at the moment, but I'm ringing because I want to wish you a very happy 90th birthday. We're all thinking of you.
That's very kind of you.
How is it up there in Scotland?
A lovely sunny day up here today, although not quite as bright as yesterday. There's a little bit of haze in the sky. Nice, though.
Well, you're sounding very well, Ian. I hope you're keeping safe and well at this very difficult time.
So far, well, I had the problem earlier on in the year, but as far as the current coronavirus is concerned, that hasn't yet bitten me, and I'm feeling very good and staying at home.
Oh, well, that's great to hear, Ian. And I was just saying on the internet how much time and effort you put into Jimmy's career in the very, very early days. And I just want to thank you for that. I think as all motorsport fans, Jim Clark has brought so much to the lives of so many people around the world. And you were right there, right at the beginning, watching Jimmy in your racing your Porsche, racing your Sunbeam Talbot. What was he like in that Sunbeam Talbot, as a matter of interest? I've never really asked you, but what did he look like when he was driving it?
I didn't actually sit with him very often in the Sunbeam Talbot because he usually driving the Porsche or the DKW before that. But when you saw him from outside, he looked totally in control as usual and obviously enjoying himself.
Yeah, I often think of Jimmy, those beautiful country roads you have around your part of the world, and they're quite narrow, but I often think about Jimmy driving on those. Presumably, he was usually pretty quick on those roads, I would guess, going from A to B, doing whatever he was, going to the pub.
He was, although he was reasonably careful too. I mean, he certainly didn't do bad things on the road, but he did drive. I particularly remember an occasion when we'd been through in Glasgow at a celebratory dinner for Jimmy's first championship win, and we were coming home in the port in his Galaxy. Unfortunately, I'd overeaten at the dinner and I probably had a bit too much drink. And I think Jimmy and Graham Gould had carted me into the Galaxy and parked me and laid me on the back seat. And about an hour in fact into the journey, I woke up and I could see Jimmy was working very hard with his shoulders. And he said to Graham something about the car. It's really quite an effort today. And I just apparently said, "Oh, it's probably ice." Which they laughed like anything. But about a mile later on, it was obvious that it was black ice. And he then gave us a demonstration of driving on ice, which I shall never forget. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, he was driving really fast, total control, brilliant.
Wow, and that was the Galaxy. That would have been the year actually when he did the RAC rally in the Lotus Cortina, and he was really quick in that too, and he would have been on ice there too. So, yeah, I mean,
he was quick in road cars. He was quick, but always very sensible.
Ian, I won't keep you, but one final question. You've owned some really nice road cars over the years. What would be your all-time favorite personal road car?
I actually think the original Lotus Elite, especially the road one that I had, was the car that I still wish I had. I loved the Lotus Elite. It's such a lovely looking car, and it was so quick for its tiny little engine. Marvelous car.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was talking to Gordon Murray relatively recently. I've just got a video out with him, and he was saying exactly the same thing. The Elan and the Elite, particularly the Elite, a timeless car in terms of its shape, very, very quick, and a car to be treasured and cherished even today. As much as we treasure you too, Ian, and have a very, very happy 90th. Take care and look forward to speaking to you very soon. Well, certainly when you're 91, but certainly enjoy the day too. Thank you very much indeed for chatting.
And thank you too for Peter for phoning.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was Ian Scott Watson. Isn't that lovely? Great guy, and just one of the really gentle people, I think, in motor racing. And good luck to him. So so I'm trying to read some questions now, so it's coming back. So we've done the Cleveland. Wow, Amane, the amount of books in the background. Well, that's not all of it. We've actually got a lot of books all over the place. I've got another library downstairs. So I said at some point we should do a show or two on all the books, my favorite books. But yeah, lots there. I've always loved books. It's what kind of got me into racing, and I love the smell of books. I love the feel of the pages. I can still remember the feel. I think I mentioned this the other show, 62 automobile year, the quality of the printing and the paper there, just something that never goes away, really, like I don't know, first girlfriend or whatever. Horatio 156, love the corgi toys on the cake. Yeah, I like those too. As I say, I got that D-type, certainly. I probably got a couple of the others. Love models. I've got hundreds and hundreds of models. None of those very few on display at the moment. Eton Simmons, hi, big hi to Eton, who's really quick. Formula 3 driver. Hi, Pete. Who do you think the Stirling's top 3 Formula 1 drivers from the last 30 years would be? Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I think he would say Nicky, and I think he would say, I'm not sure he'd say Michael. I'm not sure he ever really felt comfortable with Michael's on-track demeanor and his antics. Certainly Nicky. He was a big Vettel fan when Seb was winning at Red Bull. Sadly, he wasn't around to talk to for the last couple of years. So I never really got a feel for him on Seb at Ferrari getting beaten by Charles Leclerc. I would imagine he would be a big Charles Leclerc fan. And I think he liked Mark Webber a lot too. Stirling judged a lot of people on how they were as ethical athletes, sporting ethics, as much as he did on and the way they behaved towards people and their manners, I think, as much as their ability in racing cars. And no surprise there, really, was there? So I think those are the ones he would probably go for. I think he always felt a bit, what's the right word? I don't want to be in any way, I don't want to put words in somebody else's mouth. But I don't think he was ever that comfortable with the way Lewis is as a racing driver. I think he had enormous respect for Lewis in every dimension, other than sometimes some of the things he saw away from the track, I think. But I don't really want to put I don't want to put words in his name, because it's not fair to do that. That was just my impression, I think. Next question, Simple Machines, ROTE. Can you suggest any good virtual museums, and have you been involved in creating an exhibit? I'm not sure I have, actually. A virtual exhibit. No, I don't think I have. That probably means I'm very stupid, which I think I am, actually, to be honest. I don't really get all that virtual stuff. Maybe I'm slightly missing the point of your question, but yeah, as I said before, I'm not a fan of simulators and gaming, really. It's just not what I do. I'd rather read a book than play a game. And equally, I'd rather drive a car than sit in a simulator. Something to do with motion sickness as well. I think I get a little bit of that. So, it doesn't mean anything whether or not I'm, into virtual. Well, all I can say is I'm not very bright when it comes to virtual stuff. Another question from Vignesh. That would have been a brilliant team, USF1. Well, thank you very much for saying that. We got a lot of flack at the time, and I felt terrible and had to reboot my career completely. It wasn't fun at all. It was one of these things where you have to just dig deep and just carry on and try to believe in the things that are true and correct, and believe in your own enthusiasm and love of motorsport, enthusiasm for and love for motorsport. And it was a difficult time. It was amazing how people quickly forget in motorsport. I don't mean that in a good way, really. I mean, I had it once before when the whole Brabham team collapsed, and it was like, I remember it sounds incredibly stupid now, but there's a thing called the Black Book, the Motor Racing Black Book, or F1 Black Book or something, which is supposedly a book of people who, with phone numbers, people who are part of the industry. And if you need to get a journalist or a sign writer or a mechanic, they're all in there. And I remember the day I ran into trouble with my Brabham F1 project, I was discarded from the book and I wasn't in the following edition. I just thought, that's really bad. You know, I've been in the sport for quite a long time, and all I was doing was trying to make this thing work. It wasn't really my fault, as was proved in court. And yet they dropped me completely from that book. And I always, and I think, it was a bit like that with the USF1 thing. People just moved on very quickly, and it was as if there was no support system at all. Probably a good thing, because I had to then start walking again and doing what I do. So yeah, it was great for the soul, I guess, in that sense. Had to learn and dig deep, but equally it was tough, very tough. What do you think of Honda's future in Formula One, from the same gentleman? I think it's very bright, actually, assuming they continue and are not too hurt by this whole virus thing. For all manufacturers, there are going to be different problems, of course, but I've always been a fan of Honda. Always, and I was very unimpressed by the job McLaren did with them this time around. And I said from day one that I thought they'd got it wrong. They needed to have a lot more control of the whole Honda operation. And I think I've proved to be correct, because the minute they went to Red Bull and Red Bull got control of them, Adrian and Christian Horner, they got the best from Honda. You've got to manage it. And I know all that because of the way it worked at Williams with Honda. But a great company, a lot of time for them. And I love the way they go about their motor racing. They're very disciplined in the detail. And that's so nice to see and so nice to watch. So I think, in theory, they've got a big future. I think they'll win a Grand Prix very, very soon, more Grand Prix. And I think they'll be championship contenders pretty quickly, to be honest. And I've said, if the championship is quite short this year, if it goes that way, I really think Max has got a big chance, actually, of winning the championship. And he's the sort of guy that would just come in and do a great job. And I think Honda will too. So yeah, got a lot of time, and I don't think Honda will, will just walk away unless there's some major drama we don't know about to do with the production cars. I don't think they'll go away until they've won a championship again. The podcast, this is from David Morris, the podcast Beyond the Grid is almost always riveting and fascinating. Do you listen to it? And if you do, were there any tales that didn't match your recollections? Well, no, I've never listened to it, I have to say. Sorry about that. I think I said a couple of shows ago, it probably sounds a bit arrogant, but when, if I'm trying to doing something else, I tend not to listen too much to racing stuff or watch it or read it, apart from my books, because I like to keep my brain relatively fresh. So I can't really answer that question. As for podcasts, I'm interested to know what everybody thinks about podcasts, because I think I would love doing them. And I've got an opportunity to maybe do them with a pretty good platform. But I'm slightly nervous about which is the better platform, YouTube or podcast. And I've been with YouTube for quite a long time, and I like the YouTube format because it makes a little sense commercially. And I think it's a very good way of talking about life and things that happened in the past, whereas I'm not sure podcasts give you quite the same versatility. So I think it's difficult to do both because they're both relatively time consuming, but I am thinking about a podcast. I mean, to some extent, what we're doing now is a podcast. You could actually listen to this as much as you could watch it, apart from the video, of course, which is what makes YouTube what it is. But I've just written an article for the BRDC Bulletin, which is a really, really nice publication, actually. I think it only goes to BRDC members, but it's really nice, really well done. Pages smell great as well. Ian Titchmarsh is very much behind it. There's always some lovely archive photographs from there, in there. And I write an article for them for every edition. And this one that's just out, I've written an article about trying to ask why more young drivers don't use YouTube as a platform to actually make money and go racing with. And my point is that most young guys today are pretty good at putting pictures out on Instagram and Facebook and short videos and doing this and that. But what does all that add up to? It adds up to an image that they want to be projecting, which they somehow think in their mind, that's cool, that's how I want to be perceived, and I've got X thousand viewers here and X thousand subscribers there, and aren't I great, sort of thing. There's nothing really wrong with any of that. But for me, YouTube is an incredible thing because it basically allows every one of us on this planet Earth to have our own TV channel. And having spent about 40, 50 years wanting my own TV channel, or certainly my own TV show, to do and say what I'm interested in doing and saying, we now have it, and it's free, and it's a YouTube platform. And I'm astonished that more drivers aren't doing that and doing real TV, by which I mean warts and all, ups and downs, their lives that we can share. They've all got privileged existences in a way because they're living the dream for millions of people around the world. They're racing drivers, regardless of the category they're in. And as such, their lives are fascinating. And it's always the difficult moments that are the best television. And what I don't really get about Facebook or Instagram is that it's basically around the best moments. And aren't we funny? And isn't this brilliant? And I've just won. And wow, look at that. Very little of it is helmet throwing, and this is the worst moment of my life. How am I going to get myself out of this hole? How am I going to find the money to go racing next week? That is what human drama is all about. We don't see enough of that in Formula One, but that's another subject altogether. Let's just talk about young drivers. And I firmly believe that if young drivers actually told their story on YouTube on a regular basis, highs and lows in italics, I think it could work. And there are drivers out there, and there's a German driver who's racing in GTs, who's got 3.4 million subscribers, and he pays his entire racing budget from the revenue he gets from his YouTube channel. That is amazing to me. Of course, it's not easy. Of course, you've got to do a good job. You've got to do it consistently. You've got to know what you're doing in terms of video and sound and everything else. But it is out there to be done. And you've got to ask yourself, if you're a young driver, which is more difficult? Getting the addresses and phone numbers and knocking on the doors of Fortune 500 owners and trying to persuade them to give you money to put on your car to race in the category you're in, knowing that you haven't really got much television airtime to sell, knowing that you haven't got much hospitality to sell either. That, or doing a YouTube channel, which is entirely in your control, admittedly quite difficult, but nonetheless doable, which is telling your own life story, which isn't a bad thing to be doing anyway. To me, it's a no-brainer, but I'm astonished that more young drivers aren't doing that. And I guess it's partly to do with image, and they think that they shouldn't be seen to be talking about their bad days and their fears, and partly because they're quite, I was going to say lazy, it's not the right word, but they're so preoccupied with projecting these images on this very quick bite-sized media that they don't have the bigger picture of using YouTube. I think it's an opportunity missed. Anyway, that was a question about whether or not I listen to podcasts, and what a ridiculous answer. But there we go. I think on that basis, let's have another video. Now, this one is born of James Roberts has got a lot to answer for. He's the editor-in-chief of this new wonderful official Formula One magazine. And Jimmy, I've known for many years now through F1 Racing, the other magazine, the other F1 Racing, asked me a couple of questions this week. One of which was, what was the origin of the checkered flag? And why was green chosen as Britain's national racing colour? And what was the rivalry like between Achille Varzi and Tazio Nuvolari? 3 easy questions. The checkered one, I think, is to do with the checkers that used to be on the start-finish line of the very, very early races, turn of the century. They were called checkers because they were checking the order of the cars as they went past. And to signify the area of the checkers, they did a check flag. And usually check is black and white. If you talk about check, whether it be tiles or whatever, it's black and white. I think that's where it came from. But if somebody's got a better answer, then please let me know. Origin of green, I have absolutely no idea. And again, if somebody knows the answer to that, I'd really like to know. And I'm not saying obviously it was a national color. What we're talking about is when they defined which country would have which color. In other words, Germany would be white, and silver later on, but it was originally white, I think, or Italy would be red, and Great Britain would be green, British racing green. How was that decided? Who made those decisions? That's a good question, isn't it? Maybe it was the green grass of countrified England, who knows? Anyway, the other question was Tazio Nuvolari and Achille Varzi. And so I did a bit of research on Achille Varzi. This one isn't APArchive, but it is a couple of other agencies that very kindly have given me an amazing bundle of black and white prints of Achille Varzi, mainly in Alphas and Bugattis, as distinct from the Auto Union. And so I put these together in a short video with a bit of music, and I've actually voiced it over already to talk about Achille Varzi, because he was a driver that captured my imagination, really, when I first read about him in Competition Car magazine in 1974 in an article written by the great Nigel Roebuck. And I rang Nigel yesterday and said, Nigel, I've got these pictures of Varzi. And he said, really? Where did you find these? I've never seen these, anything like. Anyway, he was very excited. I said, Nigel, what I'd like to do is paraphrase your article and voice that paraphrasing over these photographs as we run them about Varzi, to tell a little bit of a story about Varzi and who he was. And he said, yeah, delighted. So that's what I've done. And that's the story of what this is. And I should tell you at the end of this, you'll see a painting of Varzi as he was depicted on the front cover of a magazine called El Grafico. And the reason that's there is because right at the end, I point out that Fangio was a massive Varzi fan. They met when Varzi was racing in Argentina, and he persuaded Fangio actually to go to Europe and begin his career in Europe. They were very close, and Fangio was a massive fan, if that's the right word. And it's interesting to see Varzi was on the front cover of El Grafico, which was the biggest sports magazine in Argentina. It was the sort of Sports Illustrated of Argentina. And there he was, I guess in about 1945, 1946, on the front cover of El Grafico. Anyway, this is the voiceover. This is the video I did of this collection of photographs. They're not in any real order that makes sense relative to the narrative. So listen to the narrative independently of looking at the pictures. But I will be putting this out as a separate video after this show as well. So enjoy. He was born into a wealthy family near Milan, and his arrival in Grand Prix racing was painless. After a successful motorcycling career, he simply bought himself an Alfa P2 in 1928, which led to a factory drive and many Grand Prix victories for the next couple of seasons. And so began the great rivalry with Tazio Nuvolari, where Nuvolari was an uncomplicated hero of the people, the embodiment of extrovert heroism, the true Italian who talked with his hands and loved children. Varzi was a creature of mystery, uncommunicative and aloof. He dressed elegantly, stayed only in the finest hotels, and certainly did not kiss babies. For all their differences, though, the two men got along well. So long as Nuvolari wasn't around to hear it, Varzi would invariably refer to him as Il Maestro, and their respect for one another was absolute. Take the 1930 Mille Miglia, which in those days was fought over 16 hours and finished in darkness. In the closing stages, Varzi led on the road, but Nuvolari was ahead on time. Then Varzi noticed in his mirrors the headlight pattern of Nuvolari's car. "It's him," he said grimly to his riding mechanic. After a while, Varzi began to hope again. The lights were gone. Was Nuvolari out? He was not. Within 30 miles of the finish, Varzi was jolted by a flash of lights and the blast of a horn. For miles, Nuvolari had been sitting there on Varzi's tail, lights off. Call it respect. Call it faith. Varzi joined Auto Union for 35, and during early tests at Monza, the Saturnine Italian met Ilsa, the wife of Paul Peach, Auto Union's young reserve driver. Varzi won at Tripoli in 36, as he had in 33 and 34, but was shattered at the prize giving when the governor of Tripoli declared Germany's Hans Stuck to be the moral winner. These were the days of the Rome-Berlin axis and the influence of von Ribbentrop. Varzi hurled his glass to the floor and stalked out, raging. In his room, he found sleep impossible, his mind in turmoil. "Try this," said Ilsa. "I often use it when I can't sleep. It helps a lot." In her fingers, she held a syringe. They'd been together a year, but this was the first Varzi knew of her addiction. Hours later, still sleepless, Achille held out his arm for the needle.
Had Varzi been an unkempt man, garrulous and undisciplined, the change might have been imperceptible for a while, but in one such as he, the transformation was startling. Morphine isn't kind. Varzi was not seen at the circuits in the very late 1930s, but when racing resumed after the war, he was back with Alfa Romeo once more. He was himself again, free of addiction after months in a home, and was now married to Norma, whom he'd known before the years of tribulation. He regained his former grace. With the great Jean-Pierre Vimille as Varzi's teammate, Alfa dominated the early post-war years. He raced in Argentina and was so captivated by the country that he spoke of retiring there to open a racing school. He also befriended Juan Manuel Fangio and persuaded him to race in Europe. The first Grand Prix of '48 was the Swiss at Bremgarten, and early evening was settling in as Varzi ventured out onto a wet track. The Alfa went into a slide on a fast S-bend, clipped a wooden barrier and somersaulted, throwing Varzi out onto the road. Varzi, wearing only his white linen helmet, was killed instantly. No one was more upset than Juan Manuel Fangio. Varzi was, to me, a god, he said. He spoke with great simplicity. He gave me precious advice. He's probably the driver I've most admired in my life, a man who cared only for his art.
The life and often sad times of Achille Varzi, one of the greatest racing drivers for sure that we've ever seen, or the human race has ever seen. Amazing, some of those photographs. I've never really known how steep the banking was at Montlhéry. Incredible. And also, there's a shot of the start of the race at Carthage, the Tunis Grand Prix, and Varzi's third row, but he won that race from there. Yeah, it just shows they're all human beings. They're all living the lives that we live today. They had their faults, they had their good points, and all the same sorts of things used to happen. And yeah, of course, we see it in black and white, but it was in colour, wasn't it? It was real life back then. I love that shot too of them in their early days when they were in motorcycling, and you see the knee pads on Varzi. Presumably that's because when he's leaning over, he's rubbing his knee on the road, I would guess, because they're not wearing helmets or anything. It wasn't for safety. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. And to me, a lot of thanks should go to Nigel Roebuck there, but and that immortal phrase, morphine isn't kind. I always remember reading that and being completely staggered when it became clear what had been going on. But I should say a big thanks to the suppliers of those photographs, Matteo Colombo, the Meurisse Agency, the Vincenzo Archive, and Tetos dall'Istantanea, who provided those black and white images of Achille Varzi. Right. A lot of questions been coming in. Again, thank you so much for all this. One of them said, good, this is from America. Oh, wait, you guys are in the UK. Good afternoon. This is my favorite channel. Thank you very much. Symbol resolution. Do you think Formula One has become too technical instead of pure racing? Are the cars too fragile? Well, I think the cars fragile in a way, but I mean, they've made them reliable by the massive amount of money and time and effort that's spent making them solid. I don't think we needed to have gone down that road of that amount of expense to make these engines as reliable as they are now. But we did that, and that money's now been spent and we have it. And the cars are relatively reliable now, aren't they? I guess. I think they're too technical. Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned this a couple of shows ago. I have no argument at all with Formula One being the pinnacle of motorsport and its unique selling point, its USP being we are technology, we are prototype manufacturers in our own right. If you want things done quickly, if you want things done at the absolute limit, the pinnacle of engineering, Formula One is your thing. But if you're going to use that as a USP, you've got to be able to allow people to touch and feel it and make it an integral part of the sport. And I think Formula One doesn't do itself justice by having a brick wall basically between its technology and us, the fans. Yes, we get videos put out, particularly by Red Bull and Mercedes. Occasionally McLaren do some quite good stuff on what they want us to see, but it's not real stuff. It's stuff they've given us. And so we have this brick wall and it's ridiculous. If they want us to sell the technology and Formula One has to live and die on that, then it needs to be much, much more accessible. That's my view on that one. And I think there's far too much money being spent anyway. I think it's all too expensive. And I've given my the way I think that we should be saving money. I think we should be cutting way back on logistics. We shouldn't be going to every country all over the planet 21 times a year. We should be focusing on various regions and putting several races on in those regions at the same track if necessary. And I've said before, I think we should have some sort of templated car, Dallara type car for the midfield to be racing without taking away the option to do your own car if you're at the front of the field. So, and those two ways would mean that we wouldn't have to have a budget cap, because it would be capping itself if we did that. So we're moving on now to questions on whether Ferrari, who are now saying that they're not going to adhere to the latest budget cap limit, should they be running the sport? Should the FIA, Liberty be calling their bluff? Well, we shouldn't be having a budget cap. That's the point, as I just said. And I think Ferrari feel the same way. Of course, they have to be seen to be saying, we think a budget cap is in order, but obviously it's going to be one that they can race with. And as I've said a million times, I know a lot of people won't like it, without Ferrari, Formula One will not really exist in the way we know it today. And so I think Ferrari are absolutely correct, basically, to try to get Formula One to work around them in a way that's manageable. We shouldn't have budget caps. Let's save the money in other areas. That's my point. If you start saying it's got to be through the budget cap, you're going to have a problem with Ferrari. And that's why I would never go the budget cap route. Simple as that. And I think it's pretty clear that, that's the way Ferrari were going to react. I'm amazed that they've gone down that route again. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to where we were. Can you analyze this from Denny? Not Denny Harm, sadly. Miss Denny enormously. Hi, Peter. Can you analyze in the future video 2020 Formula One driver grid, the potential and driving style and where they need to improve the best themselves? Okay, future show. We'll try and do that. We've been watching your videos for 7 years, learned a lot about history inside Formula One and driver personalities and driving styles. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Hello from Canada. More Scarbs, please. Yep. We'll try and get Scarbs to do that. He's a little bit elusive these days because he's working for ProDrive and doing a lot. He's a very busy boy right now. Right now, I don't know, but he is working for ProDrive. So that's why you haven't seen so much of him. But we'll definitely have him on the show. Still very much in league with Scarbs, and he's still a great guy. And we'll try and get something there. KO Cup, hello from Oxfordshire. Hello. Thanks for this interview. I'm a massive Jim Clark fan, even though he's before my time. I think you're talking about Ian Scott Watson there. When are you going to write a book? Well, we talked about that. Are you going to invite drivers and other current Formula One people to your show in the upcoming future? Check how they're doing and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, if I can. Formula One drivers and people, a while ago, I reached the end of really wanting to go through the effort of getting him on a show like this, because it's quite a big deal to tee it all up and make sure that it's all working and this and that. And, at the end of the day, they're so hamstrung really on what they can say and want to say that I'm not sure that I'm the right guy to be asking them questions, because I always want to ask real stuff and talk to them about real things. Below Formula One, I find, generally speaking, it's pretty easy. So providing everybody out there is happy and would like to watch and it's going to be popular, I'm very happy to talk to young Formula 3, Formula 2 drivers, IndyCar drivers, anything but, well, I'll get a few mates from Formula 1 for sure. But I don't want to make, I don't think it works if you get, I don't know if it's a good example, a Daniel Ricciardo finally to agree to do something set up by Red Bull, takes 6 weeks to get it, sorry, by Renault. Red Bull, he might be going back to Red Bull from what I read. And then to get it, and he's, a different time zone and Skype and this and that. Everything's always a drama. And so I kind of don't go down that route anymore. I just want to make it relatively easy and simple and repeatable. But I've got nothing against, younger drivers who haven't gone into that role yet, and to talk about their racing lives. I love doing that. It's just that whenever I do that, I did a thing with Carlos Sainz when he was in Formula 3, and it was I really enjoyed the interview, and everything that Carlos Sainz said then was real. And I think he said more in that interview with me when he was in Formula 3 than he ever has since he's been a Formula 1 driver. But yet people wouldn't watch that interview. They'd only watch Carlos, the Formula 1 McLaren driver, because he's a star. And I like Carlos a lot. He's a good bloke and don't have any issues with him whatsoever. But I'm just using him as an example that he doesn't really say much anymore. Some people might say, oh, yeah, but did you see him quote on this? But the problem is, a lot of this comes back to journalism and the style of journalism today. And it is that, let's take, for example, what we've just been talking about, the budget cap thing. I've just said that, what I think about budget caps and how I think it's completely the wrong way to go. And all it's going to do is drive Ferrari up against a brick wall. Or into a corner. I've used the brick wall analogy in another story. And I've said that, and that's my opinion. But the style of journalism in general is not to do that anymore. It's not, a journalist doesn't say budget caps are not the way to go, headline news, and put out what he thinks. What he has to do today is ring somebody like Mika Häkkinen or, I don't know, Ralf Schumacher or somebody like that and say, what do you think about budget caps? And then it has to be Mika Häkkinen, budget caps could be a problem for Ferrari. Mika's only going to say the obvious. Why are people afraid to speak their own minds these days in motor racing? It always has to be through somebody else's name. And I don't get that. And because that is the style, most of the big names are all very wary of saying anything. That's why it's gone that way. So I don't know. I just carry on doing my own thing, really. I've always done my own thing all my life. When I'm driving this way, everybody's going that way. When I'm doing this, they're all doing that. It happened when I was at school. It started happening when I was at school, and it's still going now. So what can I say? I just do my thing. Okay, next question. So that was, Alex Lamas. Ferrari seemed to be threatening to quit due to the budget cap. Well, yeah, I'm not surprised. I would too if I was Ferrari. Symbol resolution. Is sim racing a legitimate way to start a racing career? Well, I don't think it is. We talked about that before. To me, it's not all the energies that you need to be harnessing in order to make a car find its stability mid-corner that allows you, therefore, to make the correct bodily decision on the lowest downside moment of rotation. Paul Frere's written a book over there. He kind of says the same thing. Piero Taruffi. I think, as I say, it's not all hand-eye coordination and reflexes. A lot of it is, but it's not all. In fact, I'd say only 50% of it is. And if you're a Stirling Moss or a Jim Clark or a Lewis Hamilton or a Charles Leclerc or a Max Verstappen, you shouldn't be relying on your reflexes at all. It's all to do with managing the dynamic weight through inputs and feel and throttle release or throttle application against brake release and steering input. It's all those things, those tiny, tiny they're analog variables. They're not digital variables. And that's where there's a big difference between driving a racing car and driving a sim. Massive difference. Of course, if you've got very, very good hand-eye coordination, you're a very fit athlete, and you've got very good reflexes, you'll get some of the way to being a racing driver, no question about that. Whether you'll be a great racing driver and whether you will be able to adapt to the car in difficult situations, different situations, or whether you'll just be a quick racing driver when you've got a really good set of tires and you've got a perfect balance, that remains to be seen, of course. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the top 0.5% of what it's all about. So let's go back to the next video, which is, wow, this race was without doubt, in my mind, certainly the best Grand Prix drive Graham Hill ever put in. This is the father of Damon, of course, who won 2 world championships in 62 and 68. It was his best drive. And it may well have been one of the best drives, certainly one of the best drives of the 60s era, and it was one of the best drives of all time, no question about that. I'm talking, of course, of the 65 Monaco Grand Prix, a race where Jim Clark and Dan Gurney did not take part because they were at Indianapolis, and Jimmy, of course, won the Indy 500 that weekend. The race at Indy was on the Monday, the Monaco Grand Prix was on the Sunday, so it was impossible for them to do both, and both Jimmy and Dan decided to do the Indy 500. So Lotus didn't run at all, but that didn't matter because this race had it all. Jack Brabham had a new 32-valve Climax engine, and it was a really, really quick engine and a really good car, and Jack was driving beautifully. He qualified on the front row. Graham Hill had won the previous 2 Monaco Grand Prix, looking for a hat trick. He was in the BRM. He had a young Scottish driver called Jackie Stewart in the other car. BRM had always been good at Monaco, and Graham qualified on the front row as well on the pole. Beautiful drive. Ferrari were in the beginning of the dramas that would lead the following year to John Surtees walking out of the team after the Belgian Grand Prix. They had the V8 and the flat 12 car that we saw last week in that video from Monza 64 when Lorenzo drove it in practice for the first time on Saturday morning in the wet. Well, that car, that engined car, was at Monaco, and it was given to Lorenzo Bandini, not to John, and it was a quicker car than the V8 that John was racing. And as a result, Lorenzo caused all sorts of trouble for John Surtees in the race, was in front of him. And even when given team orders, Lorenzo didn't move over, and basically John Surtees went ballistic. He eventually got up to second place, would have finished a very good second, but ran out of fuel because of all that, and I guess because of all sorts of other dramas as well with the team, who knows, on the last lap, which must have really, really irritated him. And that was where it all began for Ferrari. Anyway, this race was, I got to tell you in advance because the video is quite short, but Graham basically leads Jackie off the line, and Jackie's sitting too close to Graham for BRM to be comfortable. And at one point, Tony Rudd gives a wave fist to Jackie Stewart to try to get him to drop back from Graham to keep the temperatures down on the BRM. But then Graham has a slight lead over Jackie, and he's coming into the chicane. Now, remember, in those days, the chicane was really quick. We're talking at least 100 mile an hour, 95, 100 mile an hour chicane, S-bend, where Lorenzo Bandini sadly crashed in 67. And as he came out of the tunnel over the brow towards this very fast S-bend, he saw Bob Anderson's Brabham Climax jammed in first gear, going very slowly through the chicane. Bob Anderson was driving one of Dickie Stoops' cars, 2 entries. The other was driven by Paul Hawkins, Lotus 33. Come to that in a minute. And Graham very quickly did one of these things where visually you know that as you're going to arrive at the chicane, you're going to hit the guy. So he braked really hard just to see if there was any way he could get through there without hitting him. As he got to Bob, he realized he was going to hit him, so he went straight down the escape road of the chicane, came to rest, I don't know, 30, 40 yards down the escape road, got out of the car, pushed it back so it was facing the correct way. The engine restarted. It was hot and it restarted miraculously. And Graham rejoined the race, no seatbelts in those days, having lost 45 seconds in the whole maneuver. He was now down to 5th place. Anyway, he then drove through the field and won the Grand Prix after doing that. Just amazing. And his fastest lap in the closing stages was 0.6 quicker than his pole time. That is Jochen Rindt territory. That is just amazing. And so that was the greatest of wins for Graham Hill. Of course, his 3rd win in the BRM as well. And Jackie Stewart really, of course, you would think would have won that race, but he didn't. He inherited the lead. But as he went into Sainte-Devote, Frank Gardner, who'd qualified pretty well in the John Willman Brabham BRM midfield, had an oil leak and dropped some oil on the edge of the circuit on the outside of Sainte-Devote as he came out over the crest, over the brow of the road. It caught the left rear on the oil, and Jackie spun and hit the guardrail and took a chunk out of a wheel. So all he could do was cruise around and finish 3rd. Lorenzo Bandini nearly won it, but he got beaten by the aforementioned Graham Hill. So that flat 12 car finished 2nd. And it was just one of those amazing days. So let's have a look at this. The 1965 Monaco Grand Prix, courtesy of APArchive. So there's Louis Chiron there with Princess Grace and Prince Rainier in the back. Wonderful to see them. There's Princess Grace looking incredible. Louis Chiron, the characteristic cap, flat cap. There's the driver's briefing. You see Ronnie Buckman there. Both Hondas on the back row of the grid here. Graham Hill looking like Mr. Monaco that he was. Alan Chalice there, Dobbin Chalice, who went on to work at Williams, one of the BRM mechanics. Chiron starts the race. The field bursts away. And you can see that's a midfield bunch. But Graham Hill has Jackie Stewart behind him from the start of the race. No swimming pool section there. You can see just going up the hill, coming down towards Tabac there. You see that bit of the track hasn't changed at all. But here's a good way. You see the swimming pool is there, but they never went there. They just dead straight down to a hairpin and straight back again. So there it looks like Jack Brabham there going really well in the 32 valve Climax engine Brabham. He would retire. Believe it or not, a drive to a rev counter failed and caused an oil leak. There's Bandini holding up Surtees. Graham Hill's had his moment coming through the field. There's Denny Hulme making his Formula One debut in the Brabham. And Jackie Stewart, as they're spun coming out of Sandervoort, goes up the hill. Lucky to get away with that to some extent. As I say, he would go away and finish third. Richard Atwood qualified really well in the Parnell Lotus BRM, but something broke and he went off at the hairpin, ended up in the straw bales, but a very, very good performance from Richard in qualifying. They're the two Ferraris. Surtees still stuck behind Bandini. That was what Jackie Stewart had to let Graham Hill pass there as Graham climbed back through the field. And nobody could believe it, really, when Graham Hill, there's Denny Hulme just going slowly past Chiron, something wrong with the back of the Brabham, and Graham Hill pulls up, having won his third Monaco Grand Prix, shakes the hand. He's wearing the neck brace that he put on for the first time in Austria in '64 when it was very bumpy, and he'd had that accident at Snetterton earlier in the year. Big shunt in the wet at Snetterton, hit the earth bank, and he was kind of okay, but when he got to Austria, it was so bumpy that he put on a neck brace, and then he got that sort of, looked a bit like the Michelin Man neck brace, and he raced that through 65 as well. He didn't really have a problem by then, but it was a bit like Nigel Mansell, just became a thing and that he wore, and in support of all that was going on in Formula One. No seatbelts, as I say, but Graham Hill, when people talk about great drivers and they think about the history of the sport, how often does Graham Hill's name come up? Well, there's an example of how good Graham was when things were right. And around Monaco, I mean, to blow away Jackie Stewart the way he did was very impressive. I know it was Jackie's first year in Formula One, but think about this. Jackie had won the Formula 3 race at Monaco the year before. He'd just come off a win at Silverstone, non-championship race, so he's full of confidence. Jackie Stewart, never slow. And yet that weekend, it was Graham Hill, the master, Jackie Stewart, the pupil. And in fact, during practice, often Graham would take Jackie out behind him and show him a few things where potentially there could be some overtaking, bits of camber to use, not to use. And Jackie later admitted that the reason he spun at Sandervoort is that he didn't do what Graham did out of Sandervoort, which was basically just sit on the edge of the crest of the camber of the road, so that you didn't get into that position with the left rear potentially catching something and maybe causing you to spin. That race also, 65 Monaco Grand Prix, famous for the race in which Paul Hawkins, now he'd won a Formula One race in South Africa, I think it was, South Africa, the previous November in a non-championship race, but he won there. And as a result of that, Dickie Stoop, DW Racing, gave him a drive in Formula One in a ex-Jim Clark Lotus 33, actually the car that Jimmy had crashed at Aintree in '64 when leading, but avoiding Andre Paulette, who was going very slowly, and Jimmy crashed into an advertising hoarding and damaged that car very badly. Anyway, it was rebuilt and then sold to Dickie Stoop, who put Paul Hawkins in it. Paul, very good driver, very quick Australian. He and Frank Gardner were good mates, but kind of, rivals as well. They were together a lot at Wilmot. But then at this race, Monaco, it was the second outing for Paul. He had had one at the Race of Champions and then the Monaco Grand Prix in an ex-Jim Clark Lotus 33. Paul qualified, which is only 16 on the grid in those days for a start. And practice, interesting to look at the schedule at Monaco back in those days. Thursday practice in the afternoon, Friday practice very early in the morning, both counting for the grid, and then final practice very late on Saturday after the two Formula 3 heats and before the Formula 3 final. So they ran on all 3 days, but at different times of the day. So after the morning practice on Friday, there were basically 36 hours before the cars were out again on the Saturday. Anyway, Paul qualified, and he got up to something like, I'm saying ninth in the race, just going round and round, doing a good job in the Lotus 33, when he basically lost it at this chicane, this high-speed chicane, spun and went through the straw bales into the harbour backwards. The 33 backwards launched itself, went down straight into the water, and a frogman came down and helped Paul, as they are even today, they're on boats, they're ready in case such a thing happens. They dived down and helped Paul get out of the car. The first thing Paul did was grab the frogman's mouthpiece and start breathing, of course, but then forgot to give it back to the frogman, interestingly enough. Anyway, they both survived, no problem. Paul then, in typical Paul Hawkins way, got onto a boat, got a gin and tonic and sat there thinking about life for a little bit. But interestingly enough, this shows what a pro Paul Hawkins was. They found later that he had the perspicacity when he was going backwards, mid-air, into the water, to switch off the engine so that it was okay. And it was okay. It was completely usable. It was all switched off and sealed. So that was very impressive bit of quick thinking from Paul Hawkins, who 10 years after Alberto Ascari went into the water in the Lancia at Monaco, did the same thing. And as far as I know, was the last driver to have done so. Just on Monaco, there was Matt Bishop had a nice tweet today about Luigi Fagioli. I can't remember it was on this day. I think it was the 1935 Monaco Grand Prix, which Fagioli won in the Merc 125. But the amazing thing about Fagioli is that he continued to race well post-war and won in 1951 the French Grand Prix. That's how long his career spanned. Amazing, at the age of around 51, 52. But here's the point I'm getting at. He was killed in the 52 Monaco Grand Prix. I think it was 52. Which that year, I think the only year it ever happened, was run for sports cars, would you believe? And something broke. He came out of the tunnel and something broke and he hit the wall and he was killed. But it was a sports car, not a Formula One car. Isn't that amazing? Well, I think it is anyway. Right, let's have a look. So that was 65, Graham Hill, Mega. Jimmy Roberts has just sent some sort of message. I better have a look at that. Let's have a look. He says, love the show, amazing picks of Varzi, great stuff. And yes, I remember reading Roebuck on Varzi in a chapter in Grand Prix Greats, superb stuff. Morphine isn't kind. What a line that is. So yeah, thanks Jimmy for that. Matt Bishop just sent one actually. This may interest you, you're mentioned actually. And oh, I don't know what it's all about. Matt's always sending out amazing things. This one's to do with Natalie Pinkham. Yeah, well, that's amazing too, isn't it? But that's another subject altogether. Love Natalie Pinkham. Right, okay, let's move on. Some more questions. Let's go back to my YouTube thing now. Sorry about this. Refreshing it with my phone. So I always have to find the place where I got up to you. Green. Oh, okay, we've got some questions. Podcast great. Okay, I want to read all these because they're quite interesting. Where is Scarbs? Will he be on the next thing? Well, Scarbs, come back, Scarbs. We need you. So we got there's Liberty, Ferrari, and all that stuff. Simracing. Okay. In the last episode, you eloquently described how to discern driving styles from trackside. Do TV viewers have any recourse, any cues we can spot, any way to identify characteristics? No, you don't, except I suppose with the onboard cameras, when you can see the steering input, you can see guys who've got excess steering wheel movement. There's a lot of this stuff where I think we're all guilty of it at some point, aren't we? We know there's a big moment coming. We're coming up to a bump, or there's a left-hander which is negative camber, and we know it's going to be slippery. And sometimes we do sort of this, we're getting ready and we're getting the reflexes ready and we're moving the wheel. It's all excess steering wheel movement, wasted energy, wasted energy going through the cars, detracting through the car and its tires, detracting from the energy you do want to input at the right moment in the right way. So excess steering wheel movement is something you can notice. A lot of drivers suffer from it today. I suspect it comes from sim. I may be wrong, but there's a lot of it. So that's one thing you can notice. I think on the other side of the coin, you see Lewis Hamilton doing this. And of course, what we're not seeing is the footwork that's enabling Lewis or another driver, a Charles or a Max, to do this so beautifully. And it's the footwork that creates the simplistic hand inputs. And that, again, it's difficult to see that from onboard cameras, but, you know, that's the two things I would say about what you can see with handwork. David Morris said, if you really consider doing a podcast, great idea. I can only recommend listening to a couple of episodes of the aforementioned. Okay. Well, I don't have any problem with podcasts. I just, you know, that's it really. Make it happen. Windsor. And then he says, true. I don't know why drivers are scared to show emotions when they are low. We'd love to see more emotions, more empathy would come into it. Well, yeah. And I don't know why we don't see that more in Formula One. It's all packaged rubbish that we're given these days. And it's so boring that no wonder people get turned off by it. We need real emotion. We need real stuff out there. And it isn't going to happen with a set piece interview for a start. Never in a million years. It's only going to happen if we've got GoPro cameras in all the debrief areas when the real stuff's going on and everybody's mic'd up. And that's life. That's motor racing. Let's make it happen. That's what they want. They want this technology to be something that people can get hold of. Let's get it out there. That's my view. And of course, they can always keep secrets behind some sort of paywall, not paywall, some sort of wall, techno wall. Okay, green is from the times of the Gordon Bennett Trophy. I got this from a documentary, and it's really of Irish origin. The colour refers to when Ireland held the Gordon Bennett Trophy in 1903. Well, that sounds very plausible, Simon Steele. Thank you very much for that. Take note, world. Started in Ireland, Gordon Bennett Trophy in Ireland, 1903, green. But why was Ireland green? Anyway, that's another question, I suppose. Did you watch Drive to Survive on Netflix? No, I don't actually subscribe to Netflix. I'm an Amazon Prime guy. So there you go. I don't have Netflix because if I did, I'd never do anything. And what do I watch on Amazon Prime? I watch reruns of, am I allowed to appear to be a complete prat now? I watch reruns of, when I'm working out now in the mornings to get me through the workout, I watch reruns of Ally McBeal because I think it was really well filmed. I'd love to meet David Kelly. And I think it's really well done and some good music in there too. Hope you aren't going to stop watching that. Plus, I love that new series they've done on the Test series, the Australian cricket team Test series called The Test, I think. That's pretty good. There's a lot of bad stuff in there, but again, it's a bit packaged. So that's what I do. Amazon Prime, yes. The same reason fighters don't show pain on the ring. You don't want to show weakness to your competitor. Yeah, but it's not weakness, is it? It's only weakness if you perceive it to be. But if you think about some of the moments, okay, let me rephrase that. If you think about what you would do now if you saw video that Nigel Mansell had been shooting whilst he was in Formula 3 with no money and no drive throughout the 1978 season, and we were able to touch and feel how he got through those moments and how he did get a drive and what it was like the first time he put the phone down on Dave Price, having learnt that he was going to be racing a Unipart March the following weekend at Thruxton. Those are the moments. It's not a weakness. We're all human beings. It's what life is all about. That's what we need. We need Ayrton Senna saying, I've had it with motor racing. I'm out of here. I'm back to Brazil. They don't rate me. I haven't got a budget to do Formula 3. I'm going back. That is great television. And it's out there now. Video. Get it on camera. That's what we need. It's not weakness, I don't think. Boxing? I think boxing, would it be weakness if a competitor, if the two boxers got together and at the weigh-in, one of them says, I'm going to kill this guy, I'm going to knock him down, do this, do that. And the other guy said, I think he is. I really think he is. He's much better than me. I've got very little chance. I've got a couple of things I'm going to do. Watch out for them on the night. They may work, but at the moment, I've got to take my hat off to this guy. He's brilliant. If that happened, it would be sensational news. People would think, wow, this is incredible. Let's watch, see what he's got up his sleeve. Do it differently. You know, why does everybody have to do the same thing all the time and copy everybody else's path? That's what's wrong with it all. Everybody does the same thing. I once asked if you ever thought of doing an F1 documentary a la Ken Burns. That short clip proves you could. Ah, how sweet of you. Thank you very much. That's Alex again. And it would be amazing. Again, would you make a documentary series on the history of Formula One? Well, I can't give too much away, but as it happens, over the last 6 months, I've been very lucky to work with some wonderful people. Hopefully we'll continue once all this is through on just such a series. And I think you'll love it. I think you will, but I can't really say any more about it at the moment. But thank you very much for your kind words. And trying to make people in racing, trying to make racing people or people who love motor racing, love the past as much as the present, given the fact that we've got all of the social media stuff to magnify the present, is really, really difficult. It's difficult because of the social media, and it's difficult because for so many years, Bernie Ecclestone dumbed down the past of the sport. And so the next generation would come along and they wouldn't know who Mike Hawthorne was or Tony Brooks was or Stuart Lewis Evans was, because nobody talked about them. They weren't part of our heritage. Why? Because Bernie and Max for so many years felt that in order to make Formula One as big as possible, they had to kill everything else that could possibly detract from tomorrow's race. And it was that basic. That's why F2 and F3 is dumbed down as much as it is today. It's still living in that legacy. And it's the same with the heritage of the sport. There's more now, and people are starting to do more, but it's not really real yet. It's not real in the way that it's real in other sports, golf, tennis, football, where we do have a real, where heritage is much a part of today as it was in its time. We don't have that yet in racing. And I've always wanted to do that, and that's what I love doing more than anything else, is trying to imagine what it was really like for Achille Varzi that night in Tripoli when he couldn't sleep and he'd just been accused of not being the deserved winner of that race, and he put his arm out and Isla put the needle in. Those moments are real, and we need to bring them out, and that's hopefully what we're doing in this series. We're working on, and equally what I try and do on this show as well, as much as I can. That's why I love having this partnership with APArchive, because we're starting to touch some of those things and those moments at Monaco. You know, actually, if I think about that Monaco 65 race, you know what I think of most? I think of the Monday after that race, when I know for a fact that Graham would have been at Bruce McLaren's annual barbecue on the beach at Cap Ferrat, not on the really expensive part, but on the real beach by the port, where they went water skiing and they did their thing. They always did that on a Monday, and it was Bruce's thing. That was the moment when I think of Graham Hill, how he must have felt having just won 3 Monacos in a row and won that Grand Prix the way he had. That was Monaco 65. Impossible to capture now because we don't have any film of it, but that's what I really think of. Sorry, I bashed the mic again. I was pleased to see in the reruns that it doesn't actually make as bad a noise as I thought, but I got the mic just here. Great watching you on YouTube. I like watching you back when you did the flying lap in the Smibs TV podcast. Would you also be okay? But it's nice to see the great pictures and videos. Well, just speaking of Smibs, a big hi to Peter Urban, who started me on this whole path of doing live shows. We're doing the technologies much easier now. Peter put a massive amount of effort to try and make it happen for me, and he kind of did, I think. It was very popular, and Peter's now doing a great job in a new role in Canada. Wish him all the best. Good man, the man behind Smibs TV. Formula One has evolved massively on all fronts, with the current PUs being a highlight. But what about tyres? We still use essentially rubber balloons. Shouldn't Formula One push tyre technology further? Well, it's a very good question again. But again, the answer lies in the history of where we're at. And we did find, in the way Formula One and Ferrari rejected Michelin, really. I mean, they just got rid of Michelin in the most deplorable way. I think I've mentioned this before, 2006. They did nothing to try and keep Michelin in the sport. And then Bridgestone were left with a monopoly, and then they decided that it was all too expensive and they'd got everything they were going to get out of Formula One, so they pulled out. And literally Formula One found itself with no tyres, and it would have had to have paid an Avon, as we did in '81, to come in and build racing tyres, or there was Pirelli, potentially, if Bernie could get them to come to the table. And so Pirelli came to the table with nothing like the same budget for technology and R&D that Bridgestone and Michelin had, or Goodyear for that matter. And Formula One found itself having to reinvent the way it went racing around tyres that basically weren't going to last a Grand Prix distance in the way, the Michelins would. So that's why we have pit stops. And it's not a bad thing, you could argue. Pit stops are pretty good. It makes it easier for Bridgestone to build tyres for these at least one pit stop per race, preferably more. And they don't have a massive budget on technology, but they do spend a lot on the things that matter in Formula One these days: advertising, signage, hospitality. And that's where we're at. And that's not a cynical view, that's reality. And I think Formula One is lucky to have Bridgestone doing that. They do a great job in terms of their image and the image they project of Formula One, not to mention Mario Isla, who does an amazing job between races doing voluntary ambulance driving work. And imagine how busy he's been in Italy. And I noticed he was saying yesterday, let's not rush into restarting Formula One before we're really ready in 2020, because there's a lot of things we need to consider. And I think he's absolutely right. And people are talking about Italian Grand Prix possibly being held behind closed doors. Well, what does that mean? For the teams and the industry involved, it won't be behind closed doors. It'll be business as usual. How do you have social spacing inside a Formula One garage? How do you make it work in a pit stop? I mean, I just don't get that at all. Okay, they've got all their overalls and stuff on, but it's not just the public that we need to be thinking of. It's the industry itself and the people that work in the Formula One industry and how that would work. And I think that's what Mario is saying. And it's not only the teams, it's Pirelli building tires and getting tires to that race. It's Brembo, it's carbon industry, it's the engine people. It's all these different departments. And, I think we should heed the words of Mario, because he knows more than anybody, the damage that's being done at the moment. So that was Pirelli at the end of the question about tyres. But I'm glad we had Pirelli. But the reason we're in the situation we're in is because of not having Goodyear, Bridgestone or Michelin. Of course, we all love tyre wars and we love endless tyre testing days in South Africa. But those days are gone. Ain't going to happen. Do one more question, then I've got one more video I'd love to show you. There's a bit of a discussion going on there between two of our viewers. What if Mercedes don't eventually promote Russell in the next year or so? Do you think another Formula One team would sign Russell? Yeah, I think George is he's a really, really good driver. And yeah, I think other teams would be interested in him, definitely. I can see somebody like Franz Tost thinking, well, Russell's really good, and if nobody else is going to run him, we will, and doing a deal. So yeah, I think they would. But I think Mercedes probably will run him, actually, if I think about it, because he's doing such a good job, isn't he? He's he's a top man, and he deserves the opportunity. So. Yeah, next video, the last video of this show, 1976, the James Hunt, Niki Lauda year, and it's colour too, you'll be pleased to know, APArchive, thank you very much. This is the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder, which was a 1-2 for Ferrari. I thought all the Ferrari fans out there might like to see it. In their beautiful 3-1-2 T2 flat 12 transverse gearbox. Niki Lauda, the reigning world champion, of course. And it's an interesting race because it's a race where McLaren didn't have a great balance, and James Hunt was never really happy with the car. He still qualified well, P3, I think, but he retired actually with gearbox failure, it was a relatively easy 1-2 for Ferrari. But there were a couple of little things going on. Niki Lauda was not comfortable with Clay Regazzoni and his approach, and actually on the night before the race rang Luca Montezemolo to say, they're not going to give team orders here. They should. I need to protect my championship lead. I don't need Clay doing anything silly behind me. And Luca said, and he rang Luca for advice. The team manager was Daniel Odetto, who was a very good man as well. And they left it that, okay, they would race as teammates, but there would be no team orders. And there was a bit of a chat to Clay before the race about not doing anything too silly. As it happened, Clay got a puncture just before the race and had to start with a one-used tyre and was a bit slow off the line. You'll see a bit of wheel spin, actually. Wheel spin, I really miss it. You're going to see it in this video. So Niki was never really troubled. But it was an interesting race because it was the first drive for Jody Scheckter in the six-wheel Tyrrell, and he finished fourth. And I was at that race, and I remember watching him actually going into the hairpin on the back of the circuit in practice, and he kept locking up like crazy in the six-wheeler. I said, Jody, how are you getting on? What's going on? And he said, I can't see anything through those. You had those little sort of vision hole things on the side, the clear areas where you're supposed to be able to see the front wheels in the Tyrrell. But he couldn't see it with the driving position. And so he didn't know he was locking up. He couldn't tell when he was locking up, and the whole thing was really weird for him. But he drove really well to finish fourth. Patrick Depailler was good in the other car for a while. Jacques Lafitte, very good in the Ligier. That was the other thing that was impressive, as was Vittorio Brambilla in the March. Dave White and Pete McKenzie, two mechanics on his car. I remember talking to them after that race, and they were so rapt that he'd been really quick, right up there with Ronnie, if you like, in the March. And that was something else that I took back from Zolder 76. It was a good Zolder because nothing really bad happened, which was great. And it was also a day when Mario Andretti started to show some real pace in the Lotus as well. He started to get some balance and some grip and feel that would manifest itself later in the year, winning the Japanese Grand Prix. And this, of course, long before Peter Wright had the breakthrough with the ground effect in that car. But it was the beginning of the Mario, Colin Chapman, this is starting to feel right. And that was another nice moment. And I remember also, just before we start, I remember James, I happened to be standing in the Ferrari garage chatting to Clay, actually, when James Hunt came in looking for Nicky, and Nicky wasn't around, but there was Bellantani, Scaramelli, all the mechanics were there. And James said, "Oh, it's just my car," and just climbed straight into Nicky's car and jumped in. I was with my photographer with Autocar, Ron Easton, and I said, Ron, get this picture. And we got this picture of James climbing into Nicky's car, and Nicky arrived. I said, what's going on? Get him out. It's all quite very James and Nicky. It was brilliant. Those things don't happen anymore. We don't see Lewis down at Ferrari jumping into Leclerc's car, do we? It's a shame. Anyway, let's start. This is the 1976 Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder, and look for the wheel spin as the two Ferraris leave the line. So there we see pulling up on the grid. Yeah, there's James P3, Jody in the P34. There's Clay nearest to us. Nicky just edging forward slightly. Down goes the flags. A bit of wheel spin there. Yeah, see it from Clay. Brilliant. Those flat 12s just sounded gorgeous. So there goes Clay, that is, I think. No, that's Nicky, then Clay, followed by Jacques Lafitte. No, James and then Lafitte. There you go, in the early laps. There's Jody in the Tyrrell. That's Clay. Coming out of the hairpin onto that straight leading back up to the chicane again before the pits. Always like going to Zolder, amazing hotel nearby where I used to stay with Bernard Caillet. Best steak au poivre I've ever had in my life, thanks to Bernard. Jody Scheckter was a great steak au poivre man as well. Anyway, there's Nicky after the race. Brett Lunger in the background there. Nicky kind of looking very relaxed. Clay walks up onto the podium. The garland, as I said last time, really missed those garlands. There's a bit of a handshake there. And Stirling Moss, Sir Stirling, well, Stirling as he was then, chatting to Nicky on the podium as well. And just came back to the rerun of the start again, but we don't need to see that. So that was the 76 Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder. Happy days for Ferrari. A great 1-2 finish. But of course, the World Championship changed completely when we got to the Nürburgring and Nicky had that career-changing accident. And James Hunt went on to win the World Championship. Very impressive the way he drove, very impressive in the way he ran the whole McLaren operation. And I think, if I think back now to 76, those early days in 76, it was that I think, probably incorrectly, I always had this image of James from the Formula 3 days of being pretty volatile, able to shut the gate in a very firm way if he didn't like the person who was inside him, and a firebrand in a way. And I had that image about him a bit. And then, of course, at Hesketh, it mellowed a bit. When he won in the Hesketh at Zandvoort, he thought, well, this is a different James Hunt. And then McLaren hired him. And that was anybody's fourth race for McLaren. And all of a sudden, they got to a circuit like Zolder. The McLaren M23 wasn't great there. And it was the first time I'd ever really been impressed at how good James was at driving a bad Formula One car. I'd seen him in a bad Formula 3 car, but in a bad Formula One car, he drove that McLaren beautifully. You didn't get a feel for how bad it was, apart from his use of the throttle, a little bit of understeer, but he was so good compared with Jochen Mass, who was quick, a very quick driver. But James was just another level in terms of his inputs and how sensitive he was to getting the best from the car, even when he didn't have a balance. He had understeer or he had flick oversteer and he had poor traction. He nonetheless got a lap time out of the car, and it was all sensitivity. That, I think, if I think back 76 Zolder, that was the first time I ever really felt that about James. Very, very impressive performance. So one more question. Younger drivers, question mark. Yeah, he said that. I think that's the point. Younger drivers, get some younger drivers on the grid. Peter Yannick, were there any tests with upcoming low-profile tyres on high curb circuits? I have no idea. Sorry about that. I mean, if this was the old Formula One, I would have been ringing around asking people about that. But who do you ring these days to ask questions like that? Quick question. This is the last question. Why do you think, this is Bradley Geldridge. Quick question. Why do you think oval racing isn't popular in Europe? And also short dirt track racing like late model sprint cars and modifieds? Well, I love all that. And I love sprint car racing. I love midgets. I quite like oval racing, I think, but I prefer sprint cars and midgets. But I guess the reason we don't have a lot of it is because of the weather, isn't it? The rain. I think it's quite difficult to have oval racing in the rain. Well, let's forget about dirt oval racing, but if you've got any sort of banking, it's really difficult to have racing in the rain. And that's what happened with Rockingham, I think. You know, it was a good idea if it had been in California, but it was in the middle of England and it rained a lot, and so you couldn't really race. And I think that's the main reason it's never really taken off in Europe, and why it's a kind of an American thing. It's a shame. As I say, midgets and sprints. In Australia, where I grew up, Liverpool Speedway was a really big deal. And we used to have some really, really good guys. I mean, Tony Stewart came out there, not when I was there, but he did a lot of racing out there. And, you know, it was a great thing. Jack Brabham started on Speedway in Australia in midgets. And it was a big thing. And I grew up with that to some extent. I love it. But yeah, I miss it, actually. But the reason we don't have it, I guess, is the weather, isn't it? I remember going, however, final thing, I lived in Indianapolis for a couple of years, and I went to one of their night meets at the place where they play basketball. I think it was an indoor oval anyway. That's the only way to describe it, indoor arena. And they had this tiny midget track, and it was midget racing. And it worked really well. So, I don't know, maybe it would work in Europe against the rain. Maybe that's where we should be going. Who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for watching this week. Be back again next week, and I'll try and line up a guest or two, see how that works. It'll be the next step in our technology, won't it be? To dial them in, phone them in, get them there, and have a bit of a chat. See if we can make that happen. But don't put too much pressure on me. Maybe take a couple of weeks to get to that point. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Stay safe. See you soon.